I'm Lisa Senecal.
I'm Maya May, and We're Speaking starts now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to We're Speaking.
We're back. Here we are.
Yay.
We made it through Thanksgiving week. If you are here, that means you did too. So I'm incredibly excited about that. I'm excited about our show tonight because a lot of us travel to different places. Some of you to your hometowns. Some of them might have been small towns. I'm super excited because tonight we are talking about small towns with people who know a lot about them. But during the holidays, home, family, community, that's a time for us to recenter ourselves. And remind us what is really important.
Yeah, and the coming year is going to take so much hard work from us and focus, and we're really going to need to keep coming back to reminding ourselves why it all matters so much, why we're fighting as hard as we are to preserve democracy, because it isn't an option. It really is the only option.
It truly is. Without optimism, hope, where are we going to go from here? So we've come through all of this together, and we need to continue to go through this together. So tonight we have some good news because we are going to help you get started with that.
Yeah, for the past several years, we're so excited about these guests. Our guests have been traveling through smaller town America and reporting on innovations of all sorts happening in these little towns. Their book on the project, Our Towns, 100,000-mile journey into the heart of America, is a New York Times bestseller, and it's now an HBO documentary that everybody has to watch.
It's so good.
It's so good.
It's really good.
So we will have Deborah and James Fallows on in just a little bit to talk more about renewal, experimentation, and the hope we can all find for America in our small towns.
Yes, but before we do that, we have to take a look at what we are fighting against, just in case you forgot, because you probably didn't, but let's take a look at the... Yeah, no, we have to. Sorry, we have to look. I know something we want to look away from the train wreck, but we got to look at the train wreck last week in the Republican Party.
I served with Kevin McCarthy. He's a tool.
Anytime you give me a drumstick.
Oh, yeah. It's the best part.
Hillary Clinton has been the single greatest purveyor of disinformation in the history of our country.
It kind of still shocks me that she's roaming free, that she's doing interviews, that she's actually not in jail.
And so it was his political views that led to you firing Lynn Wood.
A mixture of a little bit of that.
And what else was in the mix?
Just how he is as a person.
And what does that mean?
He's insane.
I was getting into an elevator with one of my staffers, and there she is, Ilhan Omar. And I said, oh, look, the Jihad Squad decided to show up for work today.
By the way, folks, I've renamed the squad the Hamas Caucus.
The line of supporting Donald Trump starts behind me.
In 1917, as you know, we had the Spanish flu.
Oh, I see you in the fifth row with 3 masks. Oh, Dr. Fauci, thank you for coming.
Strangle that Fauci baby in his crib. Rip the Band-Aid off.
You took that cognitive test. I asked Ronnie Jackson. You got 30 out of 30.
If President Trump was still in office, by the way, we'd already have modified vaccines to deal with the new variant.
Count on a variant about every October, every 2 years. So I think it's going to, we're going to need a new variant here. My gosh.
The vaccine is poison. We don't want the vaccine.
The shot, which is designed to see how many people will comply before they bring on the actual Mark of the Beast shot.
A real horror show.
Oh, yeah. It's the best part.
Real horror show is right. To the entire Republican Party, it's like a joke that people are dying. The way they approach to say that they're the party that cares about life, we all know that that's not true. At this point, it's to me, when you say you're the party of of lives, of caring about lives. And we all know that it's almost like they have a number of lives that they're okay with losing, like risking, like what was it? He said like 2 to 3% of children is what Rand Paul said. Yeah. Like,
yeah. And you can't say that you care deeply about life and at the same time do things like saying that Ilhan Omar is a member of the jihad squad or inciting violence against Dr. Fauci. There is just this constant violent promoting rhetoric coming out of people on the right, and it's not just people who are extreme. And one of the things that has frustrated us for 5 years now is that the people who used to be willing to call that kind of thing out no longer will do that. They are more than happy to go along with all of it if it is going to advance their careers or the amount of power that they have.
Yep. And it has consequences. And so this is why it's so important to point it out, call it out. We all know that the hypocrisy is there. I really say let's not get enraged about it because we already know that this is how they are. But we do need to point it out, call it out, and say like, hey, like this isn't okay. This isn't going to be our new normal. And like, we're all about finding solutions, I'm not going to say common ground because I don't know that common ground exists, but we're talking about new ground. We're talking about small town ground. So I'm super excited about that tonight.
One of the things that it's sometimes hard to remember, and we do have to keep reminding ourselves, is that what we see in the media is not a true reflection of the numbers of Americans who are on the side of authoritarianism and the insane stuff that the Republican Party is doing, and the people who still believe in a cohesive democracy in this country. And small towns are a wonderful place to see that. And our guests tonight, Deborah and James Fallows, are going to talk with us about that, about their book, and about the documentary that's just come out on HBO. And let's go ahead and take a look at a clip.
5 years ago, we asked people to tell us the story of your town. We've been traveling and reporting.
We thought there must be something going on in America. People wanted to talk about their town.
What we saw, how towns rise and fall, has a lot to say to our world right now.
This was a depressed timber town.
Bend was really grasping for what was going to be next.
The past is the past, and Mississippi is striving for change.
We need to replace judgment with compassion, and we need to replace punishment with treatment.
We're a safe haven. We feed the kids. They think, oh, this is just a boxing gym. That's far from the truth. We are fixing what needs to be fixed around here.
Almost every place we went, people said, the U.S. is really in horrible shape. But here, things are really moving ahead. What's your secret?
We all come together.
If it can happen here in the poorest of all states, then the positive things are replicable elsewhere.
The story of my town is the American story of this era.
Jim and Deb Fallows, welcome to We're Speaking. Yes. We are so thrilled to have you here.
Incredibly thrilled, yes.
Thanks so much, Lisa and Maya. We really appreciate it.
The documentary and the book are amazing. The work you continue to do, the writing in The Atlantic and the newsletters, they're all so important. Can you take us back to the beginning of this idea? Why did you feel that Our Towns was a book that really needed to be written?
So thanks for showing that clip, and thanks for giving us the chance and for letting us talk about this, the coexistence of all the things that are troubling and really, disturbing in American politics right now, and the other part of the American character, which is still there and we need to work with. So the shortest version of the backstory is we've been living in China for a number of years. And while living there and being based in Shanghai and Beijing, we've been all over the country. We spent more time on the road than in the big cities. So when we came back to the US in 2011, we thought we should do the same thing in this country too, because we know what it looks like from DC and New York and Los Angeles. So we began traveling, and which ended up being a 5 or 6 year project, just going from Sioux Falls to Fresno to Columbus, Mississippi to Greenville, South Carolina, and asking people not about what they thought about national politics, but what was happening there. We thought it was story to tell. So Deb, what did I leave out?
You just left out a lot of the towns, but
Yes.
that was only the start,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I love looking at it coming from like the traveler's perspective, right? Because that way we're not going to it with the assumptions of, oh, I know everything there is to know about these people, but going into it with the idea of exploration, because a lot of our problems stem from the fact that we don't know each other. We don't spend that kind of time and have those conversations. And so to that end, a lot of these conversations, you try to stay away from the national politics and dive into what's going on locally. Why did you do that? And did you find it was helpful?
Yes, we did that because if you go into a diner, for example, and ask somebody what they think about the local political race or the national political race, you know exactly what the answer is going to be and which side people will land on. But if you go into the library or the local newspaper or the school offices and ask what's going on in your town, what's important to people here, they will open up and start telling you about things local, their problems, their successes, what's important to them, and how they're facing resilience if they needed to, or renewal if they wanted to. Mm-hmm. So it was a natural and easy start.
And there's a journalistic point here that I think really sank in on us after a while that I wish more people in our business shared, which is if you just see clips of people on TV answering cable talk show type of questions, how mad are you about X, Y, and Z? People don't sound that smart. They're all saying things you've heard a million times before. But as Deb was saying, if you ask them, what about the young people? Are they moving to town or moving away? What about the school system here? What about businesses? People are smart. People are interesting when they tell their own stories. And so you have a kind of three-dimensional view of the American landscape that you don't usually get. So that was just endlessly rewarding.
No, I appreciate that so much. It ties into the next question that I had, which is there seems to be on the national scale a real compassion gap. And just watching, I'm sure everyone noticed as you just watched that trailer, so much of this story is about real connections that people are making and being able to bridge those political divides because the people and you have compassion for them. Is that something that stood out to you in town after town? Because it seems to me that is a common thing that we have all over the country in a time when sometimes it doesn't seem like we have a lot in common.
Yeah. In towns or in neighborhoods, there's no anonymity, and you can't get away with just blasting at someone because of their political views. When you might know neighbors or get a sense of what their political views are, but when you're talking about what's happening at the school board meeting, or that, the kids in this town don't have any place to swim in the summer, or why don't we have broadband here? Everything becomes everyone's issues. It's partnerships among you and your neighbors. And that there is no anonymity because you're going to see those neighbors at the grocery store, over the trash cans, walking on the walking trail, whatever it is. So having things be up close and personal and seeing people go through their difficult moments can't help but bring you together in a way that you just don't have the opportunity when you're watching cable TV or listening to shows and don't have any kind of accountability to each other.
Yeah, accountability is such a huge part of it. And having gone to college in a small town, there were only 10,000 people in Grinnell. And the students, there were only 1,300 students. So it was one of those things like you had to be accountable to what you said and how you interacted with people. And I absolutely love that. And you mentioned something in the documentary that really stuck out to me, that in your time in Japan, there was what people want, they say what they want you, that they think they want you to say, or what they say. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yes, yeah. And you as a comedian probably zoom in on this. There are two words in Japanese, tatamai and hone.
Yes,
and tatamai is what you think people want to hear, you know, kind of the nice superficial answer. The hone is what you really think.
Right.
And if you spend enough time with people and hear the stories enough, the hone comes out. You know, they get to what they really mean. And you as a comedian, Maya, probably go there immediately. No tatamai for you.
I do. But I also try to listen for the subtext when I'm talking to people. And so I'm curious, when you were having these conversations with people, did you start to see kind of commonalities in the things that people really wanted to say, but that they were kind of trying to hide because they felt like, you know, oh, this isn't the thing I'm supposed to say?
So I think that there are these contradictory realities. Something we used to say when we lived in China is that everything you could possibly say about China was true someplace in China. You know, everything, it was good, it was bad, it was rich, it was poor. Something like that is true of America in its big towns and its small towns. There is goodness and there's cruelty all at the same time. And we were impressed, I think, by the simultaneous existence of racial divides in the US, which are the great story of American history and people all talk around, but also the attempts to deal with that. And I'll just mention two briefly. One was shown in the film where in Columbus, Mississippi, at the Mississippi School of Math and Science, they have really moving reenactments of Columbus, Mississippi through its history. After the Civil War, the Jim Crow era, Reconstruction, and after that, with a multiracial cast that has had a broader and broader multiracial audience in the town by going directly into the history of the town and its presence. And through the Plains states, we saw this first in Red Oak, Iowa, and then in Kansas and in Dakotas, where the Plains have become surprisingly multiracial because of mainly agricultural and meat industries. And Sioux Falls, South Dakota, for example, has a very ambitious refugee resettlement and acclimatization program. So the more places than we expected were, of course, having all the sensitivities and blindness that America's had, but also embracing that this is our future. And I have a whole story about, you know, the future of Dodge City, which I'll give another time. But yes, there are things people avoid, but we're impressed of people trying to deal with them too.
And this also goes back to the point of knowing your neighbors, because when the Somali refugees move into Sioux Falls, or the Mexican immigrants come to Dodge City, Kansas, to work in the meatpacking industry, they are suddenly your neighbors, and they're not a foreign, fearful population anymore. You see them as hard workers who need a helping hand, and whose kids are going to go to school with your kids and be there with you. So it really changes the dynamic and changes the equation a lot when they're face to face.
You're still having these conversations with folks around the country, and as you said, race is it is our oldest, deepest wound, and what we most need to reconcile. But there's definitely there is a push away from that right now. Do you think what we're seeing in the critical race theory that isn't really critical race theory, that any legitimate discussion of American history and race in schools do you think that's really taking hold in these small communities, or are we seeing an outsized media coverage of it?
So I think, again, as if this were China, both those things are true. There's a nationalization, a sort of corrupting nationalization of a lot of local issues. And you see school boards becoming much more contested, et cetera. On the other hand, 1 week ago, 10 days ago in Pensacola, Florida, the western panhandle of Florida, just below Alabama, Matt Gaetz is the congressperson from Pensacola. We saw an incredibly moving ceremony. It was called Acknowledgement and Lament. And the short version is one of the leading families of Pensacola 100 years ago, the person who had been the most celebrated person in Pensacola, was recently discovered to have been the exalted Cyclops of the Ku Klux Klan at the time when he was also the county tax assessor and he was a county commissioner over schools, and just his name was on all buildings. And so his family, a white family, over the last 2 years, year and a half since this information has come out, has been doing what it said they needed to go through the process of making this right, which culminated with an extraordinary ceremony the Sunday before Thanksgiving in an open air amphitheater in Pensacola, where Sharon Yancey, a Methodist minister who was of this family, the Wentworth family, read a formal acknowledgement statement saying, "We acknowledge the lasting damage that our family member has done. We acknowledge this. We grieve this. We will try to make it right." And then the Reverend Freddie Tellis from the AME church there gave a phenomenally moving response to that. And it ended with Freddie Tellis. He said, "I've spent 30 years in the Marine Corps." And he pulled himself in his posture changed from that of an AME minister to a 30-year Marine Corps veteran. He stood up and he gave a Marine Corps salute and turned to Sharon Yancey and said, "I salute you. I salute you and your family for what you are doing, that a new day is starting, that this is today." And it was, I think, it was as effective a racial reality acknowledgement and challenge ceremony as I've seen in my now very long life. And this happened in Pensacola.
And the next step is something that all parties present at this ceremony recognized has to be taken. It is okay, how do we act on this? We have grieved, we have apologized, we have acknowledged. Now what do we do about it? And so they've established a committee to figure out, what steps do you take to proceed? And you can't make everything right, but you can make it better. So we'll be watching.
And I think healing, in order to have proper healing, we have to have that. It's on both sides, right? It's the forgiveness as well. It's being able, so someone has to ask to be forgiven, and then that forgiveness has to happen, and then it can kind of be a pilot, a model going into the future. And I love that that's happening in small towns, and I'm hoping
in Pensacola, Florida.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Of all places. Of all places, I think you talked about in the documentary, but the pace of life in small towns, and a lot of what is driving some of the fury that I feel this country has right now is that everything's so fast. And it doesn't give us that time to heal. It doesn't give us the time to have true, in-depth conversations. What can we learn from the small towns about how to adopt this pace in order to help our healing?
I think in a funny way, the experience in the last nearly 2 years now of COVID has brought people to a slower sense. We were all at home. Here we are on Zoom. We're still at home. We're mostly at home. And we've seen over the last 2 years what the newspaper stories say about people saying, maybe I can't take this pace anymore. Maybe I'm going to move to De Smet, South Dakota, or back to my hometown away from Brooklyn or Silicon Valley, where it was really hard and I couldn't afford it anyway, and I was rushing around all the time. I think people know in their hearts that there is more of an opportunity to move slowly, both by their own experiences, whatever they were during COVID, which is still going on, and kind of hearkening back to simpler days, which we certainly remember since we're so old, and seeing the opportunity going forward to, well, let's slow down a little bit And I don't know what lessons from small towns you can take other than there's not congestion. You're not in such a rush. There isn't that much constant entertainment. So you go to everybody's Friday night football game. The summers are long. The kids don't have maybe that much to do. So they're hanging around looking for 4-leaf clovers. These are
sounds
not
nice.
all true, but yeah, but it's kind of more true just because of the nature of there aren't that many people and it's not that crowded and sometimes there's not that much to you make your own fun. Yeah.
Right. And I think we all, I still live in a small town, grew up in a small town. You have more shared experiences, for better or worse. Sometimes everybody knows your business, and that can be wonderful and that can be challenging, especially for young people at times. But there is that real sense that you understand people because you are having those same experiences in the same small place. Is there any way that we lift that from these small towns and create a way that more people in larger areas have those shared experiences?
So that's something we've thought about a lot. And of course, there are downsides of small town living too. And lots of American literature over the centuries has been people fleeing to the big city. But I think at this moment, there are senses of accountability and possibility of action, that if you do something, you might have some effect. It matters what you do. And recognizing the complexity of people's characters. They're not just how they vote in one election or another, but there are other parts of their character too. So the only answer I think we've come up with so far is at least having people be aware that this is part of the American story right now too. It's not all people who are crazy. That part of American life exists, but there are people who are trying to say, well, what do we do for our neighbor, for our community, for the future? So making people more aware of it is the first step.
Yeah, I love that. And I love this idea of embracing the slowdown. I fear that things are starting to speed back up now that the pandemic is kind of waning, if you will. So I get a bit nervous about that. But we're also seeing changes in access of information. And so smaller towns are now having access to more and more information. Broadband is expanding. Deb, you talked about digital equity, and I'm curious of your thoughts about how that will impact the ability to kind of create a bridge over this divide.
Yeah, well, I keep saying the digital.
You're a small town girl.
I am.
I say
digital equity. When you spend time in small towns, it just becomes the sense that there isn't enough broadband becomes visceral. We would go to libraries after hours and sit outside on the sidewalk because that was the only place in town where we could get a broadband connection to connect ourselves. And then, as we all saw during COVID, when there isn't broadband available, the kids can't go to school because it is not available online because they don't have broadband. Same thing with healthcare. Remote healthcare sounds great when you can tune in and talk to your doctor on the apps over the internet. But if you don't have the internet in your small town, as we saw so many places, then you don't have those opportunities. So I think that that the new changes to pour billions of dollars into broadband to bring the country to one place can only help but equalize things.
Thank you, Biden, I'll say.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Biden, for that. I mean, it is so incredibly necessary for health, for education, for small businesses during COVID who had never in these small towns relied on anything but people stopping by or dropping in. And when that didn't happen anymore, there were real scrambles among each other to try to figure out, well, what do we do? How do we help each other? How do we save these little commercial industries? So all of that help that's coming with broadband it has to be a good thing. And watch out for the risks we all know about.
Right. There is that too. Poor people who have not been exposed to Twitter yet. It's coming. You don't have to go on social media. We've looped around a couple of times talking about how there are these experiences and this goodness and innovation and folks trying to do the right thing all over the country. You have started a foundation, the Our Towns Civic Foundation, which is really wonderful. I encourage folks to go to ourtownsfoundation.org and check it out. You can also read the story that Jim just posted today that he told us a bit about with the town in Pensacola. It's really phenomenal. But I'm curious, the mission of your foundation is to sort of link up all of these different good civic organizations that are trying to do good stuff. And so can you tell us a little bit more about the reason for doing it and how that's working?
Yes, thanks so much for asking. So one of the big discoveries for us of years on the road is how much was going on around the country that nobody knew about. There are all these activities in the Central Valley of California or across the Dakotas or in parts of Florida and in Georgia that we had not heard of before we got there, and none of them were where the other things were going, or even the Vermont-based Community Heart and Soul project that you're probably well aware of from the Orton Family Foundation. So our mission is, number one, to tell more of these stories so that people's picture of the country is less sort of nightmarish than it is the moment, and to connect people who are engaged in these efforts, so that just as the reformers of the early 1900s became more powerful when they felt like they're part of a movement, so too the people who are renewing the American fabric can think they have something in common and they have the wind at their back.
Yeah, knowing you have allies is important.
Yeah. And also to just give them a bigger megaphone and let them learn, help them to learn from each other, because everybody's model is a little different. It won't exactly transfer from one town to another. But if you see efforts going on in a small town in Vermont and think, okay, well, we're out here in Oklahoma, but maybe I could take a piece of that. Maybe we could do part of that. Let's get together. Let's talk about it. And so we just hope to open it up to people to tell their own stories and to talk to each other and learn from each other and just run with it.
I think that's absolutely fantastic, leveraging technology to actually help us grow. That's what it was supposed to do. It was supposed to make our lives easier and better and connect us in those ways. And so I'm glad that you are leveraging what you've learned in small towns and access to tech and bringing it all together. It is what we desperately need, those almost becoming firsthand experiences, even if they are online and across the country in that way. So I'm so grateful for having had this conversation with y'all. Seriously, I encourage everybody to watch your documentary because it is so very good, and read the book as well. People still read books, I think. You can follow them on Twitter. You can see it right there below. But thank you so much for joining us tonight, seriously. And good luck with this project. I can't wait to hear more.
Yes, thank you very much.
Maya and Lisa, thank you so much. It's a real privilege to talk with you. So thanks for having us on, giving us the chance.
Same for me.
Oh,
thank you.
Thank you. I absolutely, these are the kind of good stories that we need to hear more of right now, because it can be so easy to slip into negativity, especially I think at this time of the year when it seems like there's an onslaught of things that are kind of making us feel like we're going backwards. We're not going backwards. There are plenty of people out there who are doing the work, and it's up to all of us to continue to do the work. You know, America is a startup. It's not a franchise. It's something that we all have to pitch in and work on. And so, yeah, whether that's taking out the trash, which is the GOP, or brainstorming ideas.
Yeah, it's really easy to get in our own little silos and feel very isolated, and even more in the past couple of years because of COVID. And the work that folks like Jim and Deb Fallows are doing, and have to give a shout out to our friends at the Franklin Project, who are doing this work as well, helping people do civic organizing and education. There are millions upon millions of people out there doing this work. They are part of this pro-democracy coalition that we talk about so much at the Lincoln Project. So folks, get involved. You are not alone. There are so many people, the majority of Americans out there who feel the way you do. We just need to all get in this together.
Yes, get it in together. And to that end, so we'll be back next week. Tomorrow, check out The Breakdown with Tara Setmayer and Rick Wilson. They'll be on at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, and they're joined by Marcus Flowers of Georgia. I am so excited to see that episode because he is working against someone who needs to go. Yeah, gotta go.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's going to be a great interview. And we are going to say our farewells for tonight. We're looking forward to seeing you back here next Wednesday. And stay tuned right now for a word from our co-founder, Reed Galen of the Lincoln Project.
Night.
Hi, everyone. I'm Reed Galen, co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Our opponents are taking huge swings at democracy and landing every punch. Establishment Democrats have no answer, but the Lincoln Project does. We know that our strategy works and that there is a lane that only we can occupy. Until Democrats are willing to take the gloves off and define their opponents with a coordinated message that voters actually remember, we're going to have to do it. Because someone has to. It is why right now we're actively working against Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, and we'll be launching similar campaigns in the future to make sure that authoritarians can't just put their sheep's clothing on again and blend in with the pack. Voters will believe it if we're not careful. The Lincoln Project is ready for this fight, and you, thankfully, are a part of it. Go to lincolnproject.us to get more involved. Together we'll fight back, and we will win. Thanks.